Welcome to the Costa Rica Travel and Living Podcast. I am your host, Adam Baker. This is your weekly podcast where I discuss with friends, colleagues, and expats around Costa Rica everything related to travel and living here in Costa Rica. I'm a British expat who's been here since 2006, so know a thing or two about living in this part of the world. My guest today is Paul Butcher. He's a UK expat who originally came over with his family way back in 2013. Paul's been living here for nearly 10 years now. He's originally from North London, and him and his family, they wanted to immigrate, and they were choosing somewhere in the Caribbean area, and they settled on Costa Rica after a couple of visits. It's fascinating chatting with Paul about his experiences and about his trips before they decided to make the move to Atenas in the Central Valley and even the Osa Peninsula, one of Costa Rica's primary rainforests, before setting up base here in the Central Valley, closer to the airport. It's a fascinating chat as ever with Paul, who is now a radio host and DJ for a UK online radio channel, which you can also listen to, based here in Costa Rica. So without further ado, let's jump on in and get chatting. Paul, how's it going? Thank you very much, sir, for joining the podcast. How are you doing?
Pleasure, man. Good to see you, Adam. It's wonderful to be on the podcast.
You are, I think, on this series, are my first British guest. There we go.
Oh, it's always good to be the first Brit. That's always a good thing to be.
Exactly. Hey, well, Paul, why don't we get us kicked off? Because we've got a lot to chat about. How did it all begin for you in Costa Rica? Give me the backstory.
Very quickly, I'm from London, got a family, young family, and we've been thinking about migrating from back into the early 2000s. And we, for various reasons, looked at islands across the Caribbean. We were going to buy somewhere in St. Vincent. That didn't work out for various reasons. And so we were just looking at a holiday destination, and we came across Costa Rica. And we came down here, spent a couple of months way down south in Osa, spent time swimming with dolphins, saw humpback whales with their calves, hung out with monkeys, and just had a really awesome time. And at this stage, my daughter, youngest, was 18 months. I had boys of like 10 and 8 at that time. And we just really enjoyed it, Adam. And we came back and just sort of thought, okay, let's put that into the pot as a possible destination. Did lots of research, lots of due diligence, joined Facebook groups, which is probably a bad thing to do because of the nature of the information on there.
Hit and miss.
And then decided to come back for a further trip, a sort of due diligence. By that stage, we'd reached out to various schools. We'd asked, what was the admissions process. We looked at, what we could possibly do by way of work. I am a lawyer, and I had a law business. And obviously wasn't going to transfer that, but I was looking at other things I wanted to do. So I had my eye on sort of botanical things, gardens, plants, and so on. And so anyway, we came back in 2013 for a second due diligence. Spent a month in Atenas in the Central Valley. And from there, sort of scoped out the sort of the possible commute we'd have to have and all that.
Yeah.
Looked at different schools, looked at Blue Valley School, looked at the European School. And when we went there, we kind of thought, hey, hold on, this feels cool. We could sort of walk into the school. Nobody really challenged us. We had a little look around. Then we asked, can we see this and that? Met the head, met some people behind the scenes, saw some classrooms. The kids, obviously, they liked what they saw. They came from a smallish North London primary school, and then a really large North London comprehensive school up in Berlin. And so the European school fitted for us because of what it seemed to offer. It was an arts and humanities school, obviously bilingual, but predominantly English, various numbers of other migrants there. And we just liked it. They said, however, we need to move quickly. So they said, look, you've got to make the move because of the age of our children. By this stage, our oldest boy, Solomon, was just 13. They said, you can't, because we was, we'll probably come back next year and stuff. Their school year starts in July. They said, no, come now, come as soon as you can. That might have been a marketing ploy, who knows? But we said, okay, right, great. Because they said the longer you leave it, the more difficult it would be for your children, your oldest especially, to adjust. So we then came back, talked it through as a family, sort of said to them, right, we're going to do this, which is difficult. They are, our children were proper North Londoners.
Yeah.
Arsenal season ticket holders, run for the Highgate Harriers, doing all the stuff that you'd expect from in a London family. Lots of friends. So it was a really big move. I had an established business, all of that stuff. So we decided to wrench ourselves from there and come here. And, it was probably a crazy thing to do. Not really in retrospect, but at the time, because we had to do so much, pack up, ship out our stuff, put our house on the market for rent and do all the saying goodbyes. It was an emotionally difficult thing for the children, especially our oldest boy. He found it very difficult. He had a girlfriend and so on.
Yeah.
And we were coming into the unknown because, of course, the place we spent in 2010 in the Osa was not at all the Costa Rica we were moving to. And we had a month in Atenas, and we'd done the commute. We thought, oh, this is cool. And then we started looking for places to live. And, we had a sort of an initial vacation rent, I guess, for like 2 months, which was in Atenas. And we did the commute from there to the European school, which is, for those who know the geography, quite some distance, San Pablo de Heredia from Atenas. So we drove along the pista, along the highway, the main highway, all along Route 1 and Route 3. And it took us forever. And we did that for a couple of months. And that was just killing us. So then we decided we needed to move somewhere closer. So we ended up in Ciudad Colón, which, if you know the geography, is not really any closer at all. In fact, it took us as long.
To give the listeners some like a bit of comprehension, you're based in northern Heredia of like the town of San Francisco de Heredia, which is
I am now, yes,
in the central region of San Jose, where the metropolitan area is.
Yes,
all built up along the four cities there: San Jose,
yes,
Alajuela, and Heredia. Atenas, as you mentioned, is a very popular town halfway between the closest coast on the Pacific side and the city,
yes,
famous for its perfect climate, about 24 degrees all year round. So that is a drive back getting to the school for the kids. That's not close. No.
Yeah, and the road was one of the twisty roads, and so every morning it was kind of like, it was horrendous. But moving to Ciudad Colón was also great, except we were, as the North Americans say, out in the boonies. So we had this lovely house with all the trappings you'd need for sort of an expat lifestyle. You had a pool and a nice this and that. But of course, that was partly for us because of what we wanted to help with the boys and the transition. But what it didn't help them with was the actual social side of the transition, because they were so far from school still. And it took us another 2 years or so before we ended up settling where we lived for about 7 years, which is in Santo Domingo de Heredia, which was then 10 minutes from the school. We got a lovely apartment, and we never thought to live in an apartment, in a condominio, Jardines de Santo Tomas, which is next to Hotel Bougainvillea, which is one of the oldest kind of foreign-owned hotels in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
The Van der Wielens, who built that and built then the condominium, are our friends. And so we were lucky through contacts we had through the school to get an apartment there. And we lived there for 7 years. And that's where our children were brought up. And they were brought up, 2 boys going to the European school. They went through the whole of their school, kind of secondary school there, and they loved it. And it's a really good school for what it offered them.
Yeah.
And they did the IB, which for those who don't know is the International Baccalaureate, an internationally recognized qualification, which allowed them to apply to universities in the US or across Europe, and in our case, to the UK. They also took the entrance exams for universities here, which is an open thing you can do for the state universities. And here, for your listeners who may not know this, the systems are reversed. So lots of kids go to private schools for their primary and secondary education. And then for the tertiary, they go to state, well, this is how it used to be, state universities. Those are the better class universities. I think it's changing, but certainly that's what it was. And of course, the state kids, the kids who go to the public schools here, then are in a kind of a fighting match to get in to the state universities, which the private school kids have got an advantage over. They do an extra year, and they are probably at a higher level. So they were all getting into the universities. Anyway, our kids took the entrance exam. The boys took the entrance exam for the universities here. But I have to say the draw for them to go back to the UK to study was too great. So that's where they are now. They're studying one in Sussex, the other one in Bath University. And so it's kind of, we came here, right, we're moving to Costa Rica. And the boys said, thanks, Dad, we're going back to England. So
exactly.
That's what you have to be aware of. And one of the things for us, which that has meant is a consequence, which is a tricky one, is our daughter, who was younger, she turned 6. We moved here on New Year's Eve 2013. She turned 6 a couple of days later. So she spent more than half her life here. So she's effectively a Tika. The boys are bilingual. Rose and I, my wife, are not, but we get by.
Yeah.
But our daughter is very much immersed in Costa Rican culture and stuff. So, you know, she goes out with her friends to the mall, she hangs out, she takes part in stuff here. And she goes to a Costa Rican school. So it's all Spanish.
Knowing that your sons of 10 and 13 came over at that point in early 2012, how would you find that integration culturally for them? Obviously, your daughter's a lot younger, so it's a bit more natural as she's growing up. Did they find it? Was it easy? What surprised you? What were the challenges as a family growing up for those guys coming here?
Yeah, it's interesting. For the middle child, it was easiest. It might be because he was just had a year in primary school, whereas the oldest was straight into secondary school.
Right.
There were other English speakers, and in fact, a couple of English kids in the school in the class. But no, actually, there weren't. There were English speakers, but they weren't English. So it was kind of learning a new language. That was a difficult thing. The Costa Ricans in that school could all speak English, but they didn't all speak it in kind of recreation, in playtime. So trying to replicate the kind of setup that they had socially here was tricky. In England was tricky.
Yeah.
They were part of football clubs, running clubs, martial arts. They were busy. That was probably the hardest thing for us. We were looking around trying to find something similar, and it didn't really exist. I don't think it does really. I mean, I think it does, but not to the same extent. I mean, they were part of a football club in England called Regent's Park FC, and there were loads of other football clubs like that. And, if you're good, then you might go to play for Arsenal or whoever. But there's an established league for kids, and the same for running and athletics. Here, I think you either join Saprissa, which is one of the Premier League clubs, or Heredia or whatever, and there is a lower level amongst the municipalities, but there isn't really, I haven't seen them. They do exist. The boys they joined a football club called River Plate, Rio Plata, which was based in Santana. And so that was the hardest thing, finding something for them to do and the social side of it as well. So those things were the tricky kind of things to navigate.
They're going from that experience of living, North London. That's a massive, global city coming to obviously a smaller country in Costa Rica, even if you're close to the capital. And especially, from a British background, our love of soccer, football. Yeah, it's really apparent here. It's one of the most popular sports. But even trying to compare those kind of nests are very, very different. So something I found fascinating that I learned just recently with you. You mentioned that you were traveling for a couple of months in Osa, in the Osa Peninsula, down in the southeastern area of the country. Now, when I ask all my guests on the podcast, one of your top tips before considering moving to Costa Rica, it's always make sure you come and visit, do your due diligence, explore the different areas to see which area suits you. Very few times does the Osa Peninsula come up as a place to actually live, because it's the only, to give quite a bit of context, it's the only primary rainforest in the country. It's incredibly humid. It sees a lot of rainfall in the green season, amazing wildlife, but it's really rural. There's nothing up there. Generally, you have to take domestic flights from the capital to get there quickly. Otherwise, it's a 6 or 8 hour drive. So what on earth made you guys go to Osa for a couple of months? And whereabouts in Osa?
Well, we stayed around and about near to Puerto Jimenez. When I say near, as you said, the travel distances there are incredibly long. So it took us probably a good 2 hours plus to get to the place we were based. And then we traveled around within there. I guess we decided to go there because we wanted to see, it was the wildlife. It was, I think Jacques Cousteau recorded one of his wildlife films based in the Golfo Dulce. So we kind of wanted to replicate, have some of that. So we did, and we enjoyed what we saw there. But it wasn't a realistic representation of life that we would then be leading and are leading here. And so I think that was the difficulty for us, is that adjustment from perhaps what we saw, not because it's a vacation. We knew that it was a vacation and we were having an extended holiday, but we knew that that's what we were doing. But the reality of a life lived now in terms of what we need. So you need to be near infrastructure. You need to be near to where you either work or your schools, which is why we based ourselves and are based still in Heredia. If people would say, oh, what's Heredia like? Would I like to live there? It wouldn't necessarily be a place you'd say, oh, yeah, it's really good. You like it. I do like it because we love Santo Domingo. It's a great little town, 2 lovely big churches. But it's not something that immediately hits you. And I think that's probably my advice to people generally about Costa Rica. San Jose is a city that people deride and they say it's horrible, it's this, it's that. and it's not a good place to go and visit. But we've noticed it change over these years. It's a much better place than it was to visit. We'll go down there, we'll wander around. I like it. It's got something which perhaps I didn't see it had when I first visited. So when I first visited, I was probably comparing it with something that didn't exist, rather than actually looking and seeing what does it have. Yeah. And it has, you know, so you wander around the park, so you go to the Plaza de España, and you go to the different bits just to the north, where it's been kind of gentrified, Paris Calante, and it's quite a nice place to take a walk. But if you drive through it and you go through Barrio Mexico, you're going to be seeing, wow, you're going, this is absolutely in-your-face poverty. Yeah. And it isn't a pleasant place to walk around. So I guess it's kind of what you need to do is to give a place time and to see it for what it is, rather than try to kind of latch onto your expectations, something, and expect it to be like that. And if it isn't like that, and that means anything and everything, it could be the food you eat, you know, how you socialize. If you don't get that, then you're not happy. Well, you're just probably not adjusting your vision to see what there is in front of you. And I go through that all the time. I used to get very frustrated by the driving here, and people will often say the driving here is not of a standard that necessarily is comparable to the UK. No. Putting it mildly. But that doesn't mean to say they're bad drivers, they just drive different. Yes. They're very closed, so they don't really see the road around them. Some do. Whereas in the UK and in London, because it's so congested, you have to always give and take to allow the flow of traffic. You're taught that. Here, that doesn't seem to figure. So often they'll just block things, and you're like, but this is so stupid, or they won't let you out.
I know.
And yet they don't match that with the sort of road rage that you would encounter in the UK. You know, people coming out of their cars and saying, come on, then. That doesn't happen here, although it probably does.
They get very angry inside the cars. The Ticos are really...
Exactly, and that's kind of, I'm like, no, don't do that. But it's taken me a while, and my wife will hopefully correct me if I'm wrong, to say, I've actually managed to make my peace with the driving here. It's taken me a while, but it's okay. I let it go. Not because I'm finding my inner zen. It's just because I can't impose my standards upon people who don't know what it is that I'm trying to tell them to do.
Of course not. And then you'd be like, well, bugger off back to your country then. The idea...
And exactly, and that annoys me greatly. When people say, why don't you go back to your country? I'm like, but what do you mean? I don't understand. I'm here now. I live here.
Yeah.
You know, I can still express confusion, dissatisfaction, and frustration about how things are done here without it being seen as an attack upon your whole being. Yeah. So, you know, as you know here, there is an image and there's a reality. And the green image is a brilliant one. And sometimes the reality is less.
But that's not the thing that makes the headlines, of course, which is why you won't really see that as much until you actually live it. And you make a very valid point. Of course, the idea is trying to impose the expectations of where you're coming from to another country. It's highly unlikely. That's why it's so important to come and experience, even like you had in Atenas and in Lyosa, to see if this is a culture, a people, you know, a day-to-day lifestyle that can be comparable with something that you know, you like. And that's why it's so interesting speaking to such a diverse group of expats, because everybody's coming from a different background, different expectations, you know, and how we integrate with the culture differently. I find it fascinating, as you say, you're approaching 10 years now here in Costa Rica. There's kind of two questions. Why, firstly, I think sometimes it helps to give context. Why did you want to leave Britain and London? Why did you want to migrate? And then how have you found living here after nearly a decade? How do you compare it to the UK? Like with the pros and cons in general, the reasons you won't go back.
Yeah, I mean, we left for a variety of reasons. It wasn't so much we were running away or being pushed out. It was more, as I said at the beginning, we had thoughts of migrating because with my family, we wanted to experience a different sort of life. You know, there's an expression, we're traveling people. I come from a family of migrants from different parts of the world, as does my wife. And so for us, the idea of being fixed in a place didn't seem natural. So I wanted to move. And within my immediate family, my family have moved about. So I kind of thought, let's see how this could work. So we gravitated to the Caribbean. We looked at that. And then I thought, well, I want to learn a different culture as well, a different language. So that was important. And so Costa Rica then sort of stood out as a place to come to. It had lots of we read lots of books, the Moon book, we read Expat, Living in Costa Rica, there's various other books. So we read the books, did all we could on our due diligence. And it wasn't so much we didn't want to be in the UK anymore, because we love the UK.
Yeah.
But we left just before we left in 2014. So it was Cameron's government. And then we left, and then after we left, we had the Brexit vote. And that to me spoke to a Britain that I didn't grow up with. And it spoke to a Britain that I was sad to see unfold. And my friends, and coming from North London, it would be no surprise that most of the people in my neighbourhood were European or were migrants themselves.
Yeah, most of London voted to remain.
Yeah, exactly. And so we voted Remain, and I would vote Remain tomorrow. And I'm sorry to all the listeners who would say I'm crazy, but that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. Yeah. But I don't think it's worked out too well for the UK, and that saddens me. So that's one of the things that would make me reluctant to go back, because I sort of think the UK isn't quite what it is. That said, I spend a lot of my time listening to UK-based podcasts, following UK sport, having conversations with people in the UK. And in fact, what I do day to day is I run a UK-based internet radio station. And that's my day job, if you like. And so I have direct contacts daily with the UK.
Tell us the name of the station.
It's called Soul Roots Radio.
Soul Roots Radio.
Soul Roots Radio.
There you go.
Check it out if you fancy it. We're on the internet, and you can download our apps as well.
Wonderful.
Wherever you get your apps. And so, but doing that means I keep in contact with the UK. And so I guess we always have one eye on what's happening there, whether it's the weather or it's political events, although I don't really worry too much about those anymore. But it's sport. Sport keeps us going. We always follow the Premier League or Wimbledon. And that means I always remain connected to being very much, I'm a Londoner and I'm from the UK. And that's always weird, because I inhabit a space, and I think most people who do, I'm sure you do as well, where we're bicultural, or there's this thing called cultural dissonance, which sounds a bit arty-farty, but generally what it means is you think you're neither at home here or there. And whenever I went back to the UK last year, we went to Lisbon as well, and obviously we didn't have our house, so we were staying with friends, we were renting an Airbnb in London, we went to Dorset, and I felt as if I was at home, but I didn't.
I know what you mean.
Very odd.
It's funny listening to you talking, because again, being that first Brit on the podcast, and I have many British friends here, but when you actually get to the crux of it and you have these conversations, I think it's very similar. And I imagine that's possibly the case for many expats living abroad, many of our American friends, North American friends, exactly the same. I connect to multiple podcasts. Sport for me is friends, family. I'll always go back for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Now that I have a young daughter, I don't think I'll be going back as long. But I always get my hit. I see my friends and my family in the different areas of the UK. And then I'm excited to come back to Costa Rica now that I call my home for so long, with a young family growing up here. And it is still that connection. And I think for me, technology has helped an awful lot in remaining much closer to the loved ones, abroad. Because it's a lot easier, even if it's not exactly the same. But and then, of course, obviously with the connections and the new flight routes, it's a lot easier to get home to Europe. There's a lot more connections as Costa Rica opens up, as it becomes more popular on a global scale, right, in terms of travel. So I imagine many other listeners will really understand what you say. I certainly do, as you mention it, specifically being, from the
UK.
Yeah.
But the thing I wanted to mention, sorry, Adam, to cut it. The thing I wanted to mention on that point specifically, in terms of what happens when you move, is firstly, you if you stay beyond a certain time, this will happen. This kind of cultural dissonance. And I know your situation is different in terms of your connections to Costa Rica through your partner, through your wife. Whereas for us, we do it all through school, and that's how often friendships are made. And we haven't found it that easy to establish good, firm friendships amongst Costa Ricans. That could reflect upon how we are, or it could just reflect upon where we're living or whatever. But that isn't easy. So we've tried, and you end up gravitating towards native English speakers, which isn't the best in terms of learning Spanish. And we're part of book clubs and walking groups. And so we do stuff and we get out there. But that's something to bear in mind. How easy is it going to be for you to make friends? How good are you at making friends? Will it be through your children, or will it be on your own?
That's a really good question.
The other side to that is, as I've said, our boys are in the UK. And so when they finish their degrees, we don't expect them to come back here to work. That was the plan. Obviously, plans change, but we also don't expect our daughter to go to the UK because she's much more immersed in Costa Rican culture and language and culture. And so she'll probably stay here. And that means we have managed to perhaps split our family in a way, that makes it difficult. I mean, we're not far off. We're a bit older than you. But as we look towards our later years, we're thinking, well, where are we going to be? I don't want to leave here. And what would we do with our daughter? Do we bring her back to the UK? So we don't have answers to those questions. But to your listeners, that's something to think about. You won't think about it, I guarantee, because you'll be just thinking about, am I going to move? What am I going to do? But in years to follow, you might think, well, actually, wow, there's that guy said we might end up looking at this situation, and we are, and we don't know what to do. And well, I don't know either. So if anybody who's been through it knows, please let us know.
No, it's a really interesting point that you break, because you've come over at the time in your life where your kids, your older boys were 10 and 13, your daughter had just been born. A lot of people are thinking about retiring. When we look at the North American expat communities, a lot larger, right? So they're in their later years to come and live, and they've already got their family roots up north.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people, that I've spoken to, also like myself, came over much younger. I a post-university gap year and just happened to stay.
Yeah.
So living my 20s, it was not a conscious decision. It happened that way. There was no other responsibility. So I think, one of my colleagues who was on one of the first episodes, her family were coming down from North Carolina so much, but now she's like, hey, you guys should come and live here. So she's bringing her family to Costa Rica. Your sons might stay in London or the UK or Europe, wherever they choose to progress, but perhaps, as more flights become, we have the direct flight with BA during the high season, right? 3 or 4 times a week.
Yeah.
It's easier to get connected. I always feel like if I can spend 2 or 3 months with my family in the UK, so my daughter always understands where she's from as well, she can pick and choose. I know I'll be based here for the foreseeable future. So at least I do feel like you have the option. I know what you mean about Brexit. It's like when you feel like those doors are closed, at least in terms of traveling, visas, the ease of migration. I feel at least still here, it's more flexible. You have different methods of getting your residency, right? Staying here for long term. Absolutely fascinating. Is there anything that you wish you knew? Obviously you came down, but wish you knew before you made the move permanent?
No, actually, because we did do our planning, and I've seen lots of people say about the move that they miss certain things, they miss foodstuffs and so on. I miss Marmite, so I wish I could get Marmite here. Apart from the odd English food stuff, and I like a curry and so. But generally speaking, no. And in terms of what I know about Costa Rica now that I didn't know then, I think they're all things that you generally find out about the country when you live it. So it's rather than an individual, I wish I knew about this or that. It's windy at certain times of the year. It's not as hot, perhaps, as people think in the Central Valley. The traffic is pretty mad on occasions. The Costa Ricans are a quirky bunch. They really are, but they're wonderful people. Once you get to know them, what you might initially see as a hostility, when you smile at somebody and say hello to random strangers, whether in a car or on the street, they will inevitably reply with a friendly greeting. And that's something that I think is very special about the place. So they don't give it immediately. They're not immediately smiling at you. But as soon as you say, hola, buenos dias, they say, oh, buenos dias, ¿cómo está? And that's great. And that happens all the time, Adam, as you know. And it means that the people they are unique. They're quirky. They're quite quirky. Some of their customs, some of their kind of ways of being are a little bit weird. But one of the things I want to say to people that I think is a massive sign of why I love this country really is it's not uncommon to be walking around, driving around, and seeing an older person and a younger person hand in hand. And it could be a mother, and I'm talking somebody, say, in her 70s, and holding hands with her son who's in his 40s. It could be a father holding hands with his daughter, and they could be, in their 30s and their teens. This is not uncommon. And it happens, and also definitely with couples. So you see an old couple, they're holding hands. They'll stop, they'll show outwardly signs of affection. And I love that because they are in many ways, they're quite similar to the British. They like queuing. They love a queue here. Everybody loves a queue in Costa Rica. They're always queuing. And they're also quite private. They're very private people. So they're not sort of very gregarious in some ways, but when you're in a family situation with them, they very much are. So it's very similar to the British. And also they're very affectionate. So underneath that kind of perhaps a little bit standoffish exterior is a very warm, and they're very family oriented. So it's all about the extended family.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm like, it's such a good point. The family ties, and sometimes we British, we can be a bit cold and we are quite private, especially with family matters. But the Costa Ricans, that Latin American vibe, incredibly close. And I think that's something to really appreciate, and something that can get lost. I was quite fortunate whilst I was at college. One of my first girlfriends was from Madrid. I was traveling back and forth from Spain quite a lot. So I got close to a country that was quite close, in terms of family, kids, all generations. Without that experience on my end, I'm not sure I would have integrated so easily when I when I visited Costa Rica initially, staying with my first homestay family, which is so friendly and so open. And then the more time you spend here, the closer you realize that they are. And it's a really, really warm thing. And I think that only has a good impact. It rubs off very, very well,
The only thing I would say, the other side of it, which is important to note, is that if you're in it, it's great. But if you're not, it's not easy to get into that milieu. It's not always easy to break through, because it's a big family, which is closed to some extent unless you become part of that family.
That's a good point.
Socially, that's where we found it harder than we thought. So I have strong friendships with people in England still now, as strong as I had them when I left. And I've got good friendships here, but I haven't been able to make as many friendships with people here as I thought I would. And that's not because I'm not a friendly person. No, but it's because I think it's something to do with how Costa Ricans are. And there's often people, they offer you stuff. I'll give you a very quick story. We were in, I think it was in Nosra. We were in Nosra. I always say that, mispronounce that. And we met this lovely family, a guy called Elvis. And he was there with his family, and they were very nice. And we were staying in this sort of shared place. And they left. And then he messaged me to say, so great to meet you, nice to hang out. By the way, we left our keys. Could you bring them back? Give me the address. I said, of course. So we hooked up. We went round to where he lived. We bought their keys, and we got chatting, and we were sort of, this is really nice. And he gave us some food, and we bought some wine, and we had a chat. And then so, great, we discovered we both like tennis. So we should play tennis. I said, yeah, we should do. And so I left this meeting thinking we were going to be firm friends. And I messaged him and said, okay, when do you want to meet up? So we play tennis this week. And he said, I'll just ask the wife. And he kept saying that. And after about 3 times, I thought, but this isn't happening, is it? And I thought, but why? And I thought, I saw you replay in your mind, was it something that we said, something we did? And I realized it just wasn't that at all. It just that he needed his keys. So we were helpful to that. But he didn't want to be friends with us, not because of anything in particular about us. It's just that's just how he was.
It's so funny.
And you just have to accept it. And you just think, is it something I did? Something I didn't do? And it isn't. It's just how they are. And I can't judge him for that, although I would like to play tennis. So Elvis, if you're listening, get in touch, man. We'll have a game.
Fantastic. We should find out. Or send this, or geo-target it to Nosada. It's funny. I've definitely been in a few social situations, and also not just Costa Ricans, people from Latin America, all over the region. Sure. Same thing. Let's get together next weekend. Let's hit some balls. And again, you have to either keep pushing, at which point it feels like you're trying to make too much effort.
You're spamming them.
Or it just doesn't happen. I mean, one of the famous things, I play a lot of football here in Costa Rica. The famous analogy is you have 10 guys to play a 5-a-side game, right? A week before, everybody's playing. 3 days before, you've dropped out 2. A day before, you've got half the team. So you're hoping that you've got enough to actually have a game. Part of the culture.
It is, but that's brought me to the last one. We've probably run out of time. It's how plans are made here. We watch this with our boys. It's so funny. Whereas we're used to making plans, just like you said, and it would be something we're planning to do this. Whereas here, the plans aren't made, they're amorphous, and then they're done on the hoof, and then they disappear, and then it doesn't happen. And you're like, and our boys found this so frustrating. They said, making something happen here is really hard. Whatever it was, a social event or a get-together, it didn't seem to be, because everything happens last minute. Either the drop-ins, we're doing something now, or the drop-out. one of the things our boys said that they found really nice about being back in England is because you can walk out on the streets, you meet your friends, and you say, oh, let's go to so-and-so's house, or let's go to the pub, or let's go to find something to eat. Here, the street culture doesn't exist because it's all done very much in terms of the people we're mixing with through cars. So you're ferrying somebody to here, to there, you know, to a meeting or to this and that. There isn't that same kind of spontaneity that you can have. So I'm kind of, you know,
timetables and scheduling and organization is definitely one of those cultural differences that is challenging. And I think the longer you get used to it and you try and work around it, but it's certainly not easy. And that's a very, very good point. Paul, I've had an absolute blast chatting to you, and I know I could pick your brains. I would love to get you back on the podcast, maybe in a few months' time, and just talk about another single topic, because it's been fascinating to learn about your family, your reasoning, how your kids are doing, and where you're based now. And I hope, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people have found this very helpful indeed.
Brilliant. Pleasure, Adam.
Thank you. As ever, I'll put your contact details on your radio show. We'll put a link to that in the YouTube channel for those watching online.
www.soulrootsradio.com.
There we go. Hopefully we can get you a few more listeners. Cool.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Absolutely brilliant talking to you. Thank you very much, sir. Goodbye.
Thanks, Adam. Bye.
It's always great fun chatting with Paul. As you can see, he's a wealth of knowledge and has had an amazing experience over the last 10 years living here in Costa Rica. I have no doubt I'll get Paul back onto the podcast in the near future. If you want to check out Paul's radio show, make sure to check out the link here in YouTube or the description of this podcast to wherever you get your podcasts. As ever, if you have any questions for me, please let me know in the podcast in the description box below if you're watching on YouTube. And who knows, perhaps I will use some of those topics for future episodes. So for me, Adam Baker, I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Hasta la próxima.